Please be seated. I'm Eldon Eldred, just an old retired United Methodist preacher. And this is my wife, Rhea Eldred, just a young retired Methodist preacher's wife.
Somewhere over 80, right, Jim?
I need to warn you right off the bat. We are here to convince you to do something out of the ordinary for God. If you remember the scripture Jesus left with his disciples, "Go therefore and make disciples and go to every nation." Now, I don't know how much you have fulfilled that scripture yet, and for some of you, time is running short. So I just want to put a little pressure on you that we have a commission that is ever before us to reach out and to share the love of God with others. I have always appreciated the scripture from Micah 6:8 because the prophet is going through sharing with the people what they have done to try to please God. And so much of what they have done has come up short. Your worship, your sacrifices, whatever you have said, all sound empty to God. But in Micah 6:8, he summarizes that by saying, "What does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with God." The gospel that Jesus preached comes down to just a simple formula that every one of us can fulfill as we go about our everyday walk. After retirement, Rhea and I volunteered to do some things, and that volunteer stuff came out of some 40 years of being in pastoral ministry, but like you, being in the church, and every so often hearing special offering appeals. The first or second Sunday of March, there was an appeal of one great hour of sharing to support the work of UMCOR. And through the years, we have, at least I have, heard the work of UMCOR. When I'd go to annual conference, there would always be a speaker from headquarters talking about UMCOR, where they were involved, what nations they were involved, and always some stories that shared how they were touching lives personally. I understand a lot about UMCOR, but what I don't understand is why United Methodist Women picked that as their theme today. Rhea.
Shirley read a little bit about how United Methodist Women started here in Grand Haven. 146 years ago, a few Methodist women got together, and they had a concern that women in some countries were not receiving medical help. Male doctors were the only doctors available, and their culture would not let a male doctor work on a female patient. These women decided that they were going to do what they could in raising funds, and they sent 2 women, medical missionaries, to culturally, to countries that their culture would not let the men treat the women. These women held bake sales. They wore their cotton calico dresses and didn't buy fine dresses. They did self-denial sorts of things, a nickel out of their egg money, however they could scrape together money, and of course their enthusiasm spread, and this is where our United Methodist Women started. The idea of ministering to women and children has always been our emphasis. The mission of the church has been around the world, and we are so proud as United Methodists of all the work that our mission board does. But as a part of that, the United Methodist Women make sure that the concerns of women and children don't fall through the cracks. One of the things that we've done is girls' schools, hospitals, various things that are ministering to this. There's a revolving loan fund that United Methodist Women started and UMCOR has taken over. And women who have lost their husbands in war and things like that become the sole support for their family. And so they can get a small loan to start up a business. Sometimes it's seeds for an agriculture project. They grow the crop, they can feed their family, they have some to sell, and then they pay the loan back, and then they can continue to make a livelihood. Sometimes it's learning a craft, and they can buy some supplies and get that started, sell the crafts, and continue to support their family. The goal of UMCOR 75 years ago was to alleviate human suffering. The war, World War II was going on, and there were all these people who their lives had been upset, their cities destroyed, all of that sort of thing, so infrastructure had to be rebuilt, and places for them to live, and all of the basic human needs. New World Outlook, those of you who are on the mission committee, I'm sure are familiar with this. This is our church's mission magazine. Around the world, articles are put in here. The most recent one that came this past week, UMCOR, and the title is Focused on Alleviating Suffering, and then it lists right now where we're doing this most extensively. Syria, Iraq, Ukraine, and Nepal. Have you heard those in the news? Yes, that's where the suffering, most human suffering is going on, and that is where we are at work. For the first 40 to 50 years of UMCOR, we were very impressed at the difference we could make in the world, where there had been wars, helping rebuild people's lives. After a while, we start to get tired of hearing about all these wars. Another war breaks out. There's another flood or a hurricane, an earthquake, and more human suffering and need. Sometimes you want to just close your eyes and cover your ears and say, I don't want to hear anymore. But does that stop the suffering? No, it doesn't. And we are still involved. As soon as there's a crisis, United Methodism, our UMCOR relief kits, and whatever they need is on its way. We have a warehouse, and those things are ready. And they go to wherever the need is. Some places, there's already Christian organizations at work. And so we don't duplicate that. We join together. And in a united effort, we meet those human needs. Syria, over half of their population is displaced right now. Half of a country. I was surprised when I read in this article, we are supplying food and medicine, hygiene, protection from human trafficking. I hadn't even thought about that. But where people are displaced, the wrong kinds of people can come in and exploit them. And they're building shelters to get them through the winter. And the other one was teaching them how to identify unexploded devices and then what to do with them. Such urgent needs. Eldon, you want to tell why we're doing this?
United Methodist Committee on Relief. Just that tugging and hearing the needs that are out there. As we entered into retirement. Part of our goal was to visit the U.S., but as we went along and traveled to pick out areas where we might be able to volunteer, this was heavy for me because my abilities stopped short after being a gopher. And I was concerned about just what I would be able to contribute or add. But we had begun to learn a lot more about the Umpqua Depot in Louisiana. And that's where all of the goods that are gathered around the U.S. by fellow Methodists eventually end up for shipping out to other countries. And so we emailed, we wrote, but never heard back that much specific as far as our stopping by. So as we finished up some of our travels that first fall, we eventually called, talked to the secretary, and she said, "Oh, I'm glad you called because I lost track of you. And when are you coming?" And we said, "Is next week okay?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Do you have a place for RVs?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "How much do you charge?" And she said, "Nothing." I said, "I'll take it." That first week we were there was good for me because we got to meet the couple who basically ran the depot, a retired couple. He needed help out in the depot, which was probably 400 feet long and 100 feet wide. I'm not just sure, but it was a major eye-opener to me of the amount of materials they stored there. And he said, "We finally have caught up, and I just need to get this place organized." And so I worked with him. He ran the high-low, moving stuff around. I helped him in a variety of ways. And being a gopher turned out to be just what he needed. Following that time there, we ended up in Arizona later and visited a retired Methodist pastor and his wife. They asked what we were doing, and we shared, and then mentioned Umpqua Depot in Louisiana, and they said, "Oh, we were there." And the most interesting thing happened, and some of you will remember that I had shared this earlier, but they said while we were there, some flood buckets were shipped out that were put together by some 5th and 6th graders in the Grand Haven United Methodist Church. And Bill DeBone was teaching 5th and 6th grade when I was here, and one of their projects was put together flood buckets. Those were shipped out when Ray and Martha Burgess were working there. That was eye-opening. The next time I was there, I remember working with all of the ladies and a few men that were putting all of the kits together. Now, all of these kits that you put together are going to be inspected. They have to have certain regulations so that everything that gets shipped out of Umpqua Depot in Baldwin, Louisiana, meets specific codes, and they're all the same. So when kids open it, they don't say, "Well, you got a bigger box of crayons than I did," or "Your tablet's bigger than mine," or "What's the United Methodist flag doing on that?" So it's very restricted. Yes?
It's not just on that end. As these are going at the dock, going into those countries, some of the governments are extremely anti-American, and they don't want any of those kinds of things. They will reject the entire shipment if they can find two that are different. Maybe one has something in it that the other one doesn't have. So we don't want to waste our shipping to get to a country where the corrupt government is going to take it away from their people. We want these to get to where the children and the people are in need, and that's why they all have to be the same. The kids might not like it if it's different also, but there's a more important part of that.
Thank you. We have given permission to jump in, so it's okay. One of the tasks I did that second time there was, as the people sorting and putting everything together, they boxed so many in a box and then piled them up. I went over and picked up the boxes, put them on a pallet, and had so many on a pallet. And then the most difficult job that I've encountered in a long time, I had to take saran wrap, or shrink wrap, and wrap it, so that the saran wrap was all the way around, so that when they used the high-lows and moved them, they wouldn't fall apart. I found that after 3 times around, I was dizzy. So I had to call in help. And together we ended up doing that project together because I found out there are some projects I just can't handle. The next time there was after Katrina, and what a change, what a change. That place was buzzing. They had received FEMA money to hire locals, and so the dock was just very busy trying to get emergency supplies out locally. I often hear people say, I don't want to give money where it goes overseas when the needs here are so great. Corps jumps in where there are needs locally. And after 2 or 3 days, the guy in charge of the depot was just pulling his hair because regulations said everything comes in, gets cataloged and placed, and we know how much comes in, and then we keep track of what's going out. The need was so great, stuff was coming in, not even going into the warehouse and going right back on a truck for delivery. In the midst of this hectic schedule, 2 women from Kansas came in with a pickup truck and a horse trailer loaded with supplies. And the manager came over and said, what do you got? And he said, just load it up on that other truck and get it out of here. And then the women said, we're going to be here for 2 or 3 days if you need us. Anything we can do? And the guy said, is your truck and trailer available? We're short on delivery supplies. So for the next 2 or 3 days, these 2 women from Kansas became delivery person getting out into the area that Katrina had ravaged around Louisiana, Alabama, Arkansas. They became on hands doing stuff just because they were willing to serve. I'm not sure where I left you.
You left me right in a good spot.
Okay.
The first time we were at the depot, my job was taking the kits that came in, whether it was health kits or school kits or whichever one it was, and opening them and making sure that they were the way they were supposed to be, and then folding that top down just so and putting them in boxes and taping the boxes shut so they could be shipped. The final time that we were there was 2 weeks after Hurricane Katrina hit. As Eldon said, it was totally different. It was totally shocking. In the past, I'd been in the warehouse working, and this time they put me in a little cubbyhole office with a phone, and they said, would you call the Red Cross emergency centers that have been set up? They were in schools, they were in churches, community centers, wherever they could set these up, wherever they had power and had place for people to sleep and that sort of thing. And I was to call and see if they were still in operation and then what supplies they needed. As I called these places, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, East Texas, and the southern part of Arkansas, that whole Gulf Coast region had these centers where people, you saw it on the news. Baldwin, Louisiana is about 15 miles from the Gulf Coast, but there are barrier islands, so it wasn't devastated as much as New Orleans. But the surrounding area, as Eldon said, was just a lot of damage. So I was calling these places and asking, and it took a little while to help them to understand I was offering supplies, not asking for help, because that was all they were getting was people asking for help. And then they very cautiously asked, what do you have? What supplies? And I said, I named a few things, and then I said, what are you in need of? And so water and clothing and medicines and various sorts of things were being sent. The one thing that they said that was overlooked locally in their area, places, stores and things that weren't damaged had bottled water, and they had diapers, and they had food and things, but adult diapers were the things that they were in biggest need of. And so I was writing these things down, which ones, and he was in the warehouse watching these things go out to these places. At the end of our conversation, I was so proud to be a United Methodist because these centers were run by mainly Christians, and they would say, "What is this? What group is this that's doing this?" And I would say, "It's United Methodist Committee on Relief." "Oh, the Methodists," they'd say. "The Methodists are always available. Every time we need them in the community, every time there's anything, the Methodists are there." And they would just couldn't say enough good about it. And so I think we need to remember that we are noticed in the community, and we're where we are supposed to be, doing what God wants us to do. Yep. Of course.
One of the experiences I had after retirement, we were involved with a mission group in Michigan called the 29ers that did building projects and things. But one of their annual reunions, there was a pastor there that came to speak to present a need. He ran the depot in Illinois, and got to talking to me and showed more interest than I thought he should. And because he was asking, "Well, what did you do?" and that sort of thing. And he finally said, "We need someone to coordinate and become the administrator of our depot in Chicago. Do you have any interest?" And I thought, boy, that's asking a lot. And I shared with him my goals to travel and to see the U.S., and I wouldn't be very good about it. But as we've talked about areas to volunteer, you would be surprised where they could use former skills, business people. I think of Mike Anthus back there for some reason. He has nothing to do, but Mike's the type of guy that could show up at their doorstep and say, "Here's my resume, can you use me?" And they'd say, "Well, next year we're going to have some openings. Yeah, we'll call you." So it's not just the gopher jobs, but it's the overhead. And a lot of these are volunteer jobs, or they just want to pay your expenses. Why? Because the money you give to UMCOR, 100% goes for what you give it. The people that came from Lakeland, Florida, one time when we were there was about 12 of them that brought the bus over. They had to pay for their own gas to get there. They had to pay for some expenses living in the dormitory at Baldwin. They had to pay for their own food. Those people spent a couple $100 to volunteer. Why? Because the money you give doesn't go to pay for volunteers to pay their food and rent at their volunteer place in Louisiana. It goes for everything that they hand out and ship out of there. So some of you that have a variety of skills that simply want to sit behind a desk and tell people what to do, there might be a job for you.
The reason I'm involved in the volunteer part is a quote from Luke 12:48 that Andrew Young shared. He was mayor of Atlanta. He was an ambassador for our country. He was a very close worker with Martin Luther King Jr. He quoted, "From everyone to whom much has been given, much will be required." We may look around and think, "Oh, I don't have much." But when you look at the rest of the world, we have a lot. And I know much will be expected of me because I have. Jesus commanded us many times. We watched have records of his ministry of healing and ministering to sick and to troubled people. Those of you who were here at the district women's meeting this week heard two different people quote John Wesley's statement. He's the founder of our Methodist Church. "Do all the good you can, by all the means you can, in all the places you can, to all the people you can, as long as ever you can. That's what I think we are all required to do. And wherever it is, whether you choose to volunteer with UMCOR or wherever, I think that we're all called to do something. Okay, Eldon. I think you might have already done that. But
I mentioned the depot in Chicago. They need volunteers. This is the wrap-up. Bing, bing, bing. So pay attention. But the volunteer, UMCOR, so many places need your help. And they need your time, your energy, your skills for a few days, for a couple of months, whatever you want to give.
in the bulletin, the insert is about UMCOR. This church, United Methodist Women, some of the circles have made health kits. We've made school kits. We just did. We have made sewing kits. The other kits are bedding, birthing, and layette. And Eldon mentioned they used to be called flood buckets. Now they're called cleaning buckets. The cleaning buckets only stay within the United States. The rest of the kits can be shipped other places also.
I'm not doing as much volunteer work anymore, but one of the things I can do is throw $100 in the plate now and then for special projects. And I'm learning it doesn't hurt me that much more to raise the ante a little bit. I still have food on the table, and I still have money to golf. And so don't be afraid to give out of your pocket. And you may say, well, I'd like to do what Eldon said, but what can you do financially? Because there's so much that can help with the revolving loan fund for women that go out to help them get a business started. For every crisis that arises, UMCOR is there. We give in response to that and follow up. Every year, the last couple years at annual conference over at Calvin College, we try to do a truck that sends out supplies either to Chicago or the depot. And so just listen in May what they're gathering at annual conference to gather up a truckload of supplies and needs. And we all can pray on a regular basis. Wrap it up, dear.
Okay. One other area where you can volunteer is the personnel readiness. This was way before Volunteers in Mission began. The VIM, the Panama group that is the Crams and Tom Allgeier is on that, right? And Ruth Archer. Okay. This was, you give them your name, your skills, and when the area that you're interested in comes up, they'll call and see whether you can go. If you're interested in seeing more about what UMCOR does, go on YouTube, on the internet, and you can see all kinds of things. Look up UMCOR, and you'll see how the kits are put together and the needs. There's all kinds of resources out there that you can see. We do it because we love to. We get a blessing from it, and we hope that you'll remember 100% of your money that goes to UMCOR goes to that project. It's long-term. We don't go in and do a little and then leave, and the people are still floundering. We see it through till they are established and life is back. It's ecumenical. We work with others where they're already in existence.
I think you did a very good job. Thanks for coming today. Thank you. Amen.